As we all went through school, there's one class that we go through that impacts our lives more than any other. That's gym class, of course. How else would we know the rules to badminton or whatever else you learned? You did the craziest things in gym class, didn't you? Remember in middle school being there the day they dropped the rope from the ceiling? It said climb to the top of this high ceiling, right? We're our safety conscious culture. I don't think they do that anymore. I got to the top of that rope, and I remember being at that top thinking, now what? And I think I still have rope burns on my hands from the ride down, right? But there's one thing in gym class that has scarred more people for their lives than anything else. And it's the day that the gym teacher kind of takes off and doesn't want to teach and says, let's play kickball. And picks two captains, right? One on each side. And then lets the two captains pick from the kids. And if you're in that group of kids, we all have the same desire at that point. To not be last, right? Nobody wants to be that one kid that is clear nobody wants on their team. And there are legitimately people far into their adulthood who have these psychological problems from getting picked last. They're scarred from it. They're bruised because you feel like no one wants you at that point, right? You feel unwanted and forgotten and overlooked. And whether we were the last person picked in gym that day or not, we've all felt that way, haven't we? We've all had a time in our lives where we thought we weren't seen, that no one wanted us, that no one accepted us, that no one would ever choose us to be on their team. And the fact is, we bring that to church in our spiritual lives too. We bring that to our relationships with God. And we have this scarring from our lives that when we come to God, we think, if they wouldn't pick me in gym class, why would the God of all creation pick me to be on his team? If I'm unwanted in these places where I should be wanted, why would the God of heaven want me? In this passage in Matthew, we have a guy who, beyond a shadow of a doubt, would have been the last guy picked on the kickball team. No one would have ever wanted him on their team until Jesus shows up in his life. And shows that God doesn't view us the way the world does. God doesn't choose us the way the world does. We have Matthew, a disciple. And you might ask, why would I say that Matthew was unwanted? Well, we read one simple thing about Matthew that tells us why he's unwanted. He's a tax collector. Now, when we hear that word, we often think IRS agent. And let's be honest, not the first person on our guest list, right? But at the same time, that is a respectable profession. Somebody said to you, I'm an IRS agent. You might not want them to give you a call someday, but you wouldn't dislike them immediately because of it. That's not the way it was for Matthew. Tax collectors were the most hated individuals in Jewish culture. And the reason was simple. See, tax collectors, when Rome would come in and they would take over someplace, what they would do was they would get somebody that was local, somebody that knew the land, somebody that spoke the language, somebody that knew families, and they would task them to collect taxes. They wouldn't send their own people in. They would find somebody from where they came. And then that person could then sometimes charge more, get more money, sometimes would have to call the Roman authorities or soldiers in on you. And so they were collecting money that a lot of people didn't have. So that made them not wanted. Two, they were a lot of times thieves or crooks. We don't know that Matthew was that, but that's the reputation that they all had. But more importantly, as Jewish people, the way they viewed it was this. This person chose to play for the other team. They sided with the Romans, the enemies. And in fact, the Talmud, which is some Jewish ancient teachings, a collection of them, it equates tax collectors to murderers. It's the same level of sin against God. That's how they viewed Matthew. Nobody would have chosen Matthew to be any part of their lives. And we come to this passage, and it tells us this. This highlights how ostracized, how much of an outsider Matthew was, maybe more than anything else. Look at what it says about Matthew. He is sitting at his tax collecting booth. Now, that may not seem strange. He was doing his job, right? But I want you to think about this. In the Gospel of Matthew, one of the words that we'll see used all throughout the Gospel is the word crowds. Wherever Jesus went, there were crowds. Because if there was a guy that was healing blind people and lame people and could literally change your life like nobody else could, you want to go see that guy, right? In fact, in Matthew 9, right before this, we have a passage, a story that we talked about last week, where some men bring their paralyzed friend on a mat. And we know from that story in Mark that Jesus was engulfed in crowds. There were people all around him. He's near his hometown. He's in his hometown area. People have flocked out to see him. So wherever Jesus went, everybody came out to see Jesus. But Matthew didn't. Matthew sat at his tax collecting booth instead. Why? Why would Matthew not go and see Jesus like everybody else would? Some people said it was because of his greed. See, he's one of those greedy tax collectors. He just wanted more money that day. Well, if everybody's out of Jesus, nobody's coming to your booth, right? Not going to get much money that way. No, I don't think that it was because Matthew didn't want any part of Jesus. Because the truth is, when Jesus comes to him and he says, "Follow me, come be my disciple," what does Matthew do? Does Matthew say, "Let me think about it"? Does Matthew say, "I get off at 5, then we'll talk"? No. What does he do? He leaves it all behind and follows him immediately. Matthew is desperate to follow Jesus. He's not going out with the crowds because he doesn't want any part of Jesus, but Matthew believes that Jesus doesn't want any part of him. He's going to sit at that booth because Jesus would never want someone like me. He would never ask someone like me to be anywhere near someone like him. Tax collectors were religious outcasts. They weren't allowed in the synagogue or the temple. They were kicked out. And here's this rabbi, this teacher. Some are even saying maybe he's the Messiah. He would never want someone like me. And he believes that until he actually meets Jesus. Jesus shatters the notion that the rest of the world had about Matthew. Everyone that Matthew interacted with would have not wanted to be with him, would have probably spat at him, would have whispered underneath their breath about him. But Jesus shows up and says, "Follow me and be my disciple." Now understand, in Jesus' day, if you were a rabbi, a teacher like Jesus, you would collect students. And when you collect students, you don't just collect people that you think are smart. You don't collect people that you think would learn or that you could teach. A rabbi would gather students that he believed could carry on his teaching and message. That when he was gone, that his message would continue to live on. In essence, those students would become the teacher. They would become like him. So when Jesus is saying, follow me and be my disciple, he's saying, Matthew, tax collector, you that no one wants, that everyone hates, I want you to follow me because I believe you can become like me. I believe that you can do what I do and teach what I teach and become what I become. He encourages Matthew not just to leave his whole life behind. He encourages Matthew to find a new life. And Matthew, in a second, he leaves it all behind, doesn't he? He leaves the money, he leaves the power, he leaves the authority, the greed, the selfishness, whatever was there, whatever was holding him to that booth, he leaves it all behind for the chance to become like Jesus. He leaves it all. But he cannot leave behind what everyone else thinks of him, can he? That doesn't change. Because Matthew says, Jesus, come on over for dinner to my house. And Jesus says, yes. Now, that may not seem like a big deal to us in our culture. We probably go to dinners we don't really want to go to all the time, right? We're forced to interact with people that maybe we don't want to be real close to. But in their culture, if you sat at the same table, it was essentially saying you were equals. A king wouldn't go into a peasant's house and sit at the same table and eat with him. King could invite you to his table and elevate you, but not come to yours. That was you saying, not just that we are equals, but we can be in a relationship. So Jesus goes over to Matthew's house, and listen, look at what the scripture says. It says he invites Jesus and the disciples, and other tax collectors, and other disreputable sinners. Now, we all know the truth. Every dinner we've ever been a part of has been a table full of disreputable sinners. But not every table knows that, right? This one knows that. They know what everybody thinks about them. And it says that the Pharisees see this. The Pharisees, the righteous ones, the ones who uphold the law, the ones who teach the law, the ones who everybody looks up to. I mean, they are next to God, right? The Pharisees are the holy, righteous ones. Never miss a church service, fast every time they're supposed to. They say their prayers nice and loud so everybody knows how incredible they are. And it says they go to the disciples and they say, why? Look at the translation here. Why does your teacher, why does Jesus eat with such scum? Scum. I have a feeling it's a stronger word than that in the Greek. That's just our polite way to say it. They're not just putting down Matthew when they say that, are they? They intend to put down Jesus. They're saying Jesus is scum. He would be willing to sit and be in a relationship with and be equals to all these tax collectors and disreputable sinners. Now, here's the interesting thing. Matthew doesn't say this, but it's written in a way that sounds like this happens while Jesus is eating with them, right? That's how I read it. So, would the Pharisees come anywhere near Matthew's house and his table? Absolutely not. Who do they ask? The disciples. So what's that mean? The disciples didn't go to dinner either. The disciples don't want Matthew on their kickball team either. They see Matthew the same way everybody else does. And look, they don't answer. Because they probably think, I don't know. Why would Jesus want this guy on our team? Maybe they're starting to doubt themselves. Like, does he see me like he sees Matthew and these guys? But it says Jesus hears them. And Jesus answers. And his answer is what I want you to hear today. More than anything else. He says healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. And then he says, for I have come to call not those who think they are righteous. I have come to call those who know they are sinners. Jesus is saying, this table knows who they are. They know where they stand. They know their problems. So I can help them. But you think you're something special. You think you're something you're not. You see, we're all in the same boat. We're all Matthew. Each and every one of us. Each and every one of us has those things in our heart and life that we would say, God would never want someone like me. Because we're all sinners. It doesn't matter who we are, how young or old, no matter what. We're not worthy to be called to follow Jesus and become like him. But if we're willing to admit that, willing to know that, willing to embrace that, that's exactly who Jesus calls to follow him. When we realize we can never be good enough, I can never be righteous enough, I can never do enough, earn enough, become enough to be worthy to stand in the King's presence. At that moment, Jesus says, now you're ready. Now I can turn you into me. Now I can change you. When we recognize that we're lost, that's when we can be found. If you think you can find your own way, you'll wander through the wilderness of life on your own forever, continuing to feel unwanted and unworthy and forgotten. Now, there's a story from World War II. It is the largest rescue operation that ever happened in that war. Operation Halyard. It happened in Yugoslavia with some Serbian freedom fighters. What happened was the Nazis had taken all of this land, and the Nazis had most of Europe at this point. And so their biggest issue was they were so spread out, the Nazis had to get oil and fuel all over the place, right? So the American Air Force decided that they were going to bomb their fuel supply line. That if they could cut off the supply of fuel, they could essentially choke out the Nazis everywhere, right? But they had to fly into enemy territory and over enemy territory to do this. And so we sent all these pilots over Yugoslavia, and they had all the anti-aircraft measures, and planes didn't stand a chance against what was being fired. And so a large number of our planes were hit. We had over 500 people parachute into enemy territory during that attack. And when they landed, there was no way for us to rescue them. No way for us to come get them. No way for us to save them. They had no hope. It was one of those things like if you crash, the enemy's going to capture you. But the Serbians, the peasants there, had started an uprising, and they tracked all of those pilots and all of those airmen that fell. And they went out and they began to search for them. This happened in August. For the next 5 months, these Serbian peasants began a network where they, almost like the Underground Railroad, where they were moving these men around, hiding them in their homes, communicating in special ways so that they wouldn't get caught, all surrounded by the enemy. Even the nation itself was divided. So some of their own people, some of their own families were against what they were doing. They built this secret airstrip with ox and plows. And by December, they were able to come in and fly in. And every single pilot and airman that was downed was found and saved. 512. 512 airmen. Now, here's the amazing part. They didn't speak the same language. They couldn't really communicate. And so here, they had these men, these pilots, these airmen. They had to trust and follow these peasants that found them. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know the path. They didn't know the plan. They didn't even know where it was going to end up. But they knew they were lost. And they knew on their own they couldn't survive. So they had to trust, even though they didn't know where it would lead, even though they didn't know how they were going to be rescued, even though they didn't know how they were going to get out of the situation, they had to trust and follow. And because of that, they weren't just found, they were saved from what would have happened to them there. We're all in the same place. We are all lost in enemy territory. And we do not stand a chance on our own. We can't survive. You can try, but you will wander in the wilderness for your whole life. But there's one who wants to lead you. And listen, you don't get to know the whole plan. You don't get to know every step you're going to take and where that path's going to lead. What we do know is it leads us to salvation. Jesus is calling every single one of us to follow him. So I want to give you, I thought about this as we go through this series. Each and every one of us in this room, no matter anyone who ever steps in this place, is in one of these 5 places. And so I want you to honestly ask yourself, where are you today? And we're going to look at it as steps. If I know I'm on this step, I ask myself, what am I going to do to take to the next step? Because I want to get to the top of the steps. All right? The first step we all start on is that we're lost. Every single one of us is lost in our sin. Doesn't matter who we are. Doesn't matter where we come from, what language we speak, when we're born. None of it matters. We're all lost and in need of being found. That's the second step. In Jesus Christ, we're found. When we come to meet Jesus, we no longer have to be lost. He has done what needs to be done to find us, that we can find him and know who he is, that we can find ourselves and come to know who we are and who he created us to be. Now, most of you, most church services, most everything, think this is the top of the stairs. You get found, and that's the end of it. Praise the Lord. You make it to that second step. You've done it. You've done what you need to do to change your eternity. And that's an amazing step. But Jesus isn't done with you there. He doesn't call Matthew to just stop being a tax collector. Remember, he calls Matthew to become like him. So the next step is that we serve. He finds us and then enlists us in his service. We are called to use the gifts and abilities that he gives us, the time, whatever we have, for his kingdom, to serve him, that others who are lost might be found. No matter who we are, we have the ability to impact the world. Now, today we have a few of our young people with us who are our 5th graders, right? Who are going to be joining us in service. They're going to be graduating from Kids Zone soon and moving up. We're doing some things with them this month to help them be ready to join all of you, because y'all are rough and hard. We don't want them, we don't want to scare them away. But no, listen. You guys might feel like Matthew sometimes. You might feel the old people here. You might think you need them. And they tell you You need them. And someday you'll grow up and you can do great things. Don't listen to them. That's a lie. They need you far more than you need them. And you can change the world now. Not when you grow up. Because when you grow up, you get busy and you get old and you get bogged down. God wants to use you now. Matthew, listen. Matthew's a tax collector that nobody said God could ever use. And the words we just read today, he wrote. That tax collector wrote these words that 2,000 years later we're reading. Because he was found and followed Jesus, and Jesus used him to change our lives. We're not just called to be found. We're called to serve. But it's more than that. The next step is that we make disciples. We don't just become disciples, we make them. We spent the season of Lent talking about Jesus' last words on the cross. But the truth is, his very last words weren't on the cross because he came back. And he spoke to his disciples. And his very last words were this: go and make disciples. You've seen what I've done. You've seen who I am. Now you understand what God sent me to do. And now go tell everybody else about it. We don't just get found. We go find others. We go save others who are lost. Last step. This is the goal for each and every one of us. And that's to become like Jesus. If you start this pursuit, if you start to follow him, if you get called out of your tax collecting booth, and out of your sin, and out of your shame, and out of your unworthiness, you get called out of that. The end goal is to become like Jesus, and none of us are there. None of us are going to get there this side of heaven, but are you closer today than you were yesterday? Do you act a little more like him in how you love and you live with the people around you? Are you inching your way there? Every day, nobody wants to fall down the steps, right? We want to climb up. Are you getting closer to the top of there? Getting closer to who he is. We're all on this journey. Where are you? Where are you here? And are you ready, wherever you are, to take the next step? That's what Jesus is calling you today. To take that next step and becoming more like him. The next few weeks, we're going to pursue and look at all the ways that Jesus calls people to follow him and be used by him. And as we do that, I want to challenge you throughout it to do this. What are you doing to take that next step in your life with Jesus? No matter where you are, he's ready for you to move. He'll move when you move. So as the worship team is going to come forward and close us here in a minute, and we'll take communion after that, I want you, as we sing this song, that is a song of gratitude. To thank Jesus for what he's done for us. Thank you, Jesus, for what the cross did for us. The song talks about how we're lost. The song talks about how we're all these wretches who need to be saved by his grace. And all we can do is thank him for that and for what he's done. But as we sing this, understand that as we thank him, it is a calling for us to move forward in our relationship with him. That if I'm following, I got to go wherever he leads. You never get done following, because he'll never be done moving. He'll never be done working. He'll never be done changing the world, and he wants you to be a part of what he's doing. So may this be a challenge to us today, to come out of our booths and follow him wherever he leads, that he might make us like him, that we can change the world around us. The same way the men like Matthew changed the world around them. Let's stand and sing this today. May it be our prayer. May we ready our hearts to come to his table and give thanks and remember what he's done for us.